The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, guys. We're going to give this another 4 minutes here to let some people start joining. Thank you for everyone who's joined already. Got a great number of attendees here today. See some familiar faces in the chat. So everyone hang tight, grab a cup of coffee, grab a bite to eat, and we'll get started here probably 1 minute right after the top of the hour.
Hey, Jay.
Hey there. Hey, I just checked the old meet. No one's in there, so I don't know if
Yeah.
I'm not too worried about it.
Yeah, I was testing as well. I was looking into it. Yeah, no, it should be fine.
Hey, are you available right after this?
What do you mean?
Just a quick call right after the webinar.
Oh, yeah. I saw didn't I answer the email?
Oh, you did. That's right. It's actually not about that, but I'll talk to you. I'll talk to you afterwards.
Yeah, right after. I do have a window open right after this call.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
All right. Sorry for the side chatter there, guys. We're gonna give it about 1, maybe 2 more minutes. Let some more people join, and then we're gonna get started. Once again, thanks for everybody who's joined. Keep in mind you are going to be muted for the entire presentation. If you do have questions, if you'd like to ask them in the chat panel or the questions panel, we've got a couple of our sales engineers, including myself, on today that'd be happy to answer anything that comes up. And we will open it up towards the end for Q&A as well. So 2 more minutes, guys. Once again, grab a glass of water, grab a cup of coffee if you need it, and we'll get started here very shortly. All right, guys, I think we've given everybody enough time to jump on. If people still are joining, they can hopefully watch the recording when we're done with this. Once again, thank you all for joining today, our webinar series on ACM and ACM hardware. These lunch and learns have been amazing. We are still having them every week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So if you're not getting an invite to the webinars, please reach out to somebody, your local Avigilon resource, RSM, SE. Happy to have you guys attend. Today, I'm going to be covering Mercury hardware and some of the configuration, some of the different models, and really just how we utilize Mercury hardware within the ACM platform. I am trying something a little different than I normally do. I'm actually going to do my best to show this entire presentation from within the ACC client. So starting off, our agenda for the day, we're going to talk about the different models. We're going to talk about some best practices when you're installing your Mercury hardware. And then we're going to go through some configuration on the panel themselves and in ACM and kind of what you can do with Mercury hardware. So what is Mercury security? And I know a lot of you guys, this may be review. If you've been in the industry for a while, you know about Mercury and what it can do with possibly other access control systems. But at the core, Mercury is an open platform for security hardware, basically for door hardware. It provides a lot of flexibility because it does work with multiple OEMs in the physical access control space. It is that open platform. So running a Linux embedded operating system for all of the new panels, which I'll get to here, but it's scalable, right? So anywhere from 2 doors all the way up to 64 doors in a single controller, supporting hundreds or thousands of readers and inputs and outputs. That's all available through Mercury's open platform. So let's getting right into the models here, and I'm going to go in a little bit more detail with these models as well. These are your intelligent controllers. So in an ACM design or an ACM system, you're going to have the ACM appliance, whether that's a Pro or an Enterprise or a VM, that's going to be connected through the network to one or more of these intelligent controllers. And these range all the way from the LP1501, which is a simple, 4 opening or 2 door intelligent controller that can be powered via PoE or 12 volts. That device supports up to 17 doors downstream. Or you may have an LP1502, which is the most common intelligent controller that we see installed out in the field. I'm going to get to some examples of why you would use one versus the other here in a couple slides. The LP1502, the 2500, and the 4502, those are centrally located style controllers. So you've got an IDF, you're going to install that controller, you're going to have your sub panels all within the same room, and then you're running cable out to your door locations. Similar specifications on the 3 controllers on the right. They're powered either by 12 or 24 volts. The LP1502 has 2 onboard reader ports and can expand to a total of 64 doors using sub panels. Has built-in input and output relays for your door position sensors, your REXs, for your auxiliary inputs and things like that. The LP2500 is a large capacity controller, so it actually does support up to 64 doors, just like the LP1502. However, it has 2 RS485 ports. So we see that used a lot with wireless lock installations, where you've got controllers that are at the edge, or maybe even sub panels that are at the edge, and you need to be able to split that RS485 between 2 floors of a building, or one floor, on one floor going one direction and then a cable run going the other direction. The LP4502 is the newest LP controller, released late 2018, I believe, or early 2019. And the LP4502, if you kind of look at the controller options here, if you smushed an LP1502 and an LP2500 together, you're essentially getting all of the features of both. Dual RS485 ports, 2 onboard reader ports, 64 door capacity, with support for things like federal government requirements with FIPS 201 and PAM module and things like that. So the LP4502 has a lot of great features built into it. So we're seeing that being used more in the larger space, federal government, elevator control, things like that. It's a great option for that. So next here is, a couple of the things that all Mercury intelligent controllers support. All Mercury controllers or intelligent controllers support OSDP now. So everything that's red, even including backwards compatible to some of the EP boards, support OSDP. That's important to you because as we move forward in the security industry, the need for more secure communication between the reader and the panels is becoming more and more prevalent, and OSDP provides that. So it's a different format for the wiring from the reader back to the controller. It provides a secure encrypted connection. You can perform things like OSDP secure channel, which essentially locks the reader to the controller. So if someone tries to take that reader off and put their own reader on that location, it's not going to work. It's basically going to lock that reader out or lock that controller port out, and it won't work. All LP series controllers support multiple card formats, right? So you can have a number of different card formats on a specific panel or panels to support your customers' needs. You're not stuck with a number of only 8 or 16. I believe now the number is all the way up to 255. So we've got a ton of different support for card formats on the LP controllers. You can configure your controllers in paired master, paired slave for in-out readers. So 2 readers can share the door position sensor, the REX, the strike, and then we're actually tracking based on the direction of where people are going. And then you tie that in with area control and anti-passback and all of the other features that you get with that. Mercury controllers, especially with ACM, do support wireless locks. So ACM specifically supports wireless locks from Avigilon and ASA Abloy, specifically the AD, NDE, LE series, and then the Imperial line from ASA Abloy. For those of you guys who are on here today, next week our webinar series is going to be 100% around wireless locks. So we are going to be covering all of the wireless lock options from Avigilon next week, so we'll dive into that a little bit more. You have input tamper inputs, power fail inputs. So you have inputs built into the panel so that you can get notifications when certain events happen. TLS, I'm going to talk about this a little bit more when we get to the best practices, but all LP series controllers support TLS encryption when the panel is communicating to the appliance. That's extremely important as we get into this more secure world as we're living in today. You also can load and generate custom certificates for that TLS. So if a customer wants to be able to put on all root CAs for each one of their panels to secure those not only via TLS but also through certificate pinning and authentication, those certificates can be applied to the panels as well. And then a big thing, probably should have put this as the first bullet point, all of the LP series controllers are actually running an embedded Linux platform. So what this means for you and for us and for everyone is that it gives Mercury even more control to be open in the future, right? Linux gives them the ability to go in and actually create new features, create new hardware integrations and things like that, and then be able to pass those off to us as OEMs so that we can go in and design additional features around what they're doing. So it's a great solution for what's coming down the pipe with Mercury and what they can do. So really quickly going to go through the sub panels here. Basically, in a regular design, you've got an intelligent controller. You have sub panels. The sub panels are typically like your door controllers. So you're using these sub panels in a couple different ways to either control inputs and outputs or expand your system reader capacity. And we have those in a couple different forms here. So the MR50 is a small, call it one door. It is essentially 2 openings, so it can support in-out with OSDP only. And typically we see that installed at the edge or at the door. You're going to put that above the door in a small, double gang or triple gang box, and then do all of your wire connections from the door to that controller. The MR52, this is our most purchased or most sold product within Avigilon ACM because everybody needs doors and that is a 2-door sub panel. Now, when I say 2-door, that's for Wiegand. If you are using OSDP, you can create 4 doors on an MR52. However, they do need to be configured paired master, paired slave. So you're not getting 4 individual doors. It's essentially 2 openings with 4 readers. The LP series controllers do support that as well. But the MR52's got 8 inputs, 8 outputs for your input devices, door position switches, Rexes, and 6 outputs for your locks and for your auxiliary outputs as well. The 2 in the middle, the MR16 in, the MR16 out, those are used for a lot of different applications, especially things like elevator control, where we need to be able to control individual floors by outputs. We need to monitor those inputs from the elevator system using an input device, or we need to turn lights on. We need to connect ACM to a third-party application that's going to receive a bunch of inputs from our system or a bunch of outputs from our system. The same thing with the MR16 in. We see that used in situations where a customer wants a monitoring a bunch of doors that don't actually have readers. So we're creating them as a reader inside the system, or we're creating them as a door inside the system. However, there's no reader there. We're just monitoring the sense or the state of the door, in or out. The last one, the MR62E, is a network-based subpanel. Once again, this guy does support 4 OSDP readers. They do, however, need to be readers that can be addressed. And we are going to go in a future webinar, we're going to talk a little bit more about what OSDP is and how it works. So we'll cover that in that webinar. But the MR62E can be, once again, installed above a door. It can be powered via PoE or 12 volt, and it does support up to 4 openings. So a couple quick system design examples. This is essentially what it would look like if you were doing a typical, what we call clustered 16-door solution. So you've got a door, you've got an enclosure. Hopefully it's a life safety power supply enclosure. You've got your LP1502 and then 7 MR52s that are going to be wired to devices downstream. So you've got reader, you've got your Rex, your Strike, all of the other, all of the other devices downstream from the panel. But everything is wired back to a single location. Okay, so the IDF room or the MDF or the electrical closet or whatever it is. So all of that is wired back to a certain area. We're seeing more and more in today's connected world of this design. So on top of all of this, I probably should have put that there, but you've got ACM living somewhere over here, that appliance that's connected to the customer's network. And they've got PoE switches or PoE plus network switches. Utilizing PoE plus, we can actually just take one cable, an Ethernet cable that has that PoE and network signal, out to an LP1501 or an LP1501 and a series of MR62Es. And then instead of having long cable runs for the door hardware, we have short cable runs for the door hardware from these devices up to the controller. And the controller could be installed in a small box above the door or however far away from the door that you need. And this works in all kinds of different applications. Now, the great thing about our solution and the way that Mercury functions is you can have both of those system design examples. You can have a building that is completely wired in a clustered solution where everything's wired back to a single location, and then you can have small remote sites that have the above door, or maybe you have a gate, or you've got a location that's difficult to get a big fat cable through for your access control, but it's really easy to just run a Cat6. So you can have combinations of these different topologies. So a couple of the best practices, and I'm actually going to show this in real time as well. It's my recommendation. It's our recommendation. You get a Mercury controller from us. You get a Mercury controller from someone else. Always factory reset that before you do anything to it. Just like anything else, You never know what you're getting coming from the factory. It's very possible that someone was testing with this in an engineering department, and by factory resetting that panel, you're basically getting it with its base configuration, and you're going to be able to go through and make the changes that you want. We talked a little bit about TLS before. It is a good recommendation to use your panels with TLS required. I'm going to show you what that means in ACM. However, using TLS secures the encryption between the appliance and the panels. So you're not going to get any data traffic on your network that's going to be passed in plain text, right? TLS is going to take all of that and encrypt it. I do always recommend setting a host name on your controllers. The host name could be, LP1501-IDF1.2 or wherever it's located. Something that makes the panels easy to identify if the customer or if you need to do a network scan outside of ACM. You can always, log all of your panels, IP addresses, and host names and MAC addresses in a spreadsheet as well. That's another good recommendation. The fourth one, always set a username and password on your controllers. This will save you from having to drive out to a site when you need to go check on that controller. You need to make a change in that controller, because as you'll see here in a second, you have to flip dip switches and things like that to get into the controller for the first time. And then the last thing, before you're ready to hand this thing off to a customer and say, hey, everything's great, make sure all of your dip switches are turned off on your LP series controllers. That way it's not, it doesn't have the default IP address, it doesn't have the default username and password ready to be used, okay? So with that, let's go through a couple things here. Hopefully you guys can see this okay. There's going to be a little bit of lag because of, look at that, unusual motion detection. So I have some of the different controller options here. We've got our LP1502, we've got our LP4502. You'll notice that these guys, actually I did that backwards, 4502, 1502. But you guys will notice these look really similar. They're actually built upon almost the exact same architecture. So they do fit in the same, they use the same size boards. The LP2500 concurrently is a little bit smaller. It's about, it's a little over half the size of a regular LP1502. Then you've got the LP1501 here, which this is that one-door, two-door controller. Supports up to 17 downstream. The MR52 is the same size as the LP series, the LP1502 and 4502. You've got the MR50 here, little one-door guy. The 62E, same form factor as the LP1501. And then I've got a 16 in and a 16 out. I did that backwards as well, in, out, right? You can always tell what's an out and what's an in by the amount of protection relays that are on the board, because we need a lot when we're sending voltage out of this guy. But what I want to cover with you guys real quick is that factory reset, okay? So I'm going to fire up my LP1501, and within 10 seconds, I'm going to flip dip switch 1 off. And hopefully this thing goes and we can see the light will start to flicker here, right? So we're now going through a bulk erase on the LP1501. And in about a minute or so, this panel will be reset back to default. Now, on all LP series controllers, doesn't matter if any one of these four, your default IP address is going to be 192.168.0.251. And that's how you access the controller for the very first time. So when you're doing what I'm doing here, you're bench testing or you're bench installing all of an equipment for a job site, you do want to do these one at a time and address them accordingly so that you don't get any network collisions and things like that by having a bunch of controllers that are all the same IP address together, okay? So we look like we might be good here. And I'm gonna go ahead and pull up my Mercury default. And we're going to try to log into this guy for the very first time. And if this doesn't work yet, this just means that the panel is still rebooting, which it looks like it is. We'll give this one more minute here, guys. While I'm waiting for that, yes, I see that. Having a hard time. Hey, Francisco, are you able to see the questions? I'm having a hard time seeing them, just screen resolution.
There's no questions right now.
Oh, okay. Hey, they're in the questions. Never mind. You're getting to them. So when you log into your panel for the very first time, it's going to say click here to log in. Your default username and password is admin password. But before I can click log in, I need to flip dip switch 1 back on. Okay? So dip switch 1 on these controllers. Right? So dip switch 1, these are your dip switches. Dip switch 1 sets the default login. Dip switch 2 sets the default IP address. 3 and 4 are used for communication. Actually, number 4 is on the LP series controllers. This one here will set the LP controller into what we call legacy mode. If you have an ACM system that is not running version 5.12.2 or above, essentially, we didn't have a way to add LP controllers to those previous versions. So Mercury was smart enough to leave a mode where you can turn that on, and then the controller basically acts like an EP controller. So for those of you guys who don't know, EP, all this stuff would be green, okay? LP, everything's red. It's just the generation, one generation above where Mercury's hardware was previously. Okay. So now that we're in our LP 1501, there's a couple things we can look at and we can go in and do. You can set notes for this. But the first thing that we need to do is we need to change the IP address, and we need to change how this controller is going to communicate to ACM. So as I mentioned, one of the things that's a good idea to do is change your host name. So I'm going to go LP 1501. I'm going to use a static IP address. So this is my static IP network. Okay. And I'm going to set a gateway. And I'm also going, because I want this controller to register in DNS in my my domain controller, I'm going to add this to my domain as well. This is not a necessary step if you don't need these to register with a domain controller. And then we want to make sure that we set a DNS server. Okay. Now you'll see when I click accept, I'm not actually making the change to the controller yet. We're going to do that here when we apply the settings. So the next thing that I want to do is I want to check my my host connectivity. So LP series controllers, or all Mercury intelligent controllers, have two ways of connecting to an appliance. The default is IP server. Basically, the appliance, ACM, is going to go out and look for that controller, and we're going to make that connection. The other way to do it is IP client, which is we tell the panel where the access control system is, and it does what we refer to as call home. So it's using a connection, and it makes a connection using the MAC address of the panel back to ACM. This is great for remote sites where you just need to spin up a panel and you've got maybe internet connectivity there. You're on a 4G connection or something like that, and you just need to get back to your appliance. However, for the purposes of this, I'm going to set mine to IP server, and I do want to set my data security to TLS required. If you are using TLS, you want to set this to required. I have seen some panels go out recently that have had TLS if available. We actually don't recognize that. With ACM, what we recognize is we need a secure connection from start to finish. So you have to set this to TLS required, or basically ACM is not going to make that connection. Okay, so we'll go ahead and accept that. And then the last best practice that I told you guys to do, we want to set a user. Okay, so there's one already in here. I'm going to go ahead and delete that. And we're going to add a new user, set a username, Avigilon, and set a password. Go ahead and confirm it. And then one of the things that I do, just because I test a lot of things, I do put my password in the notes here, just so if I do need to get back into it and I forget it, I can find it again. Not something I recommend everyone do. That's just for me. So maybe in your demo environments, your house system, that would be a good thing to do. Okay. So now I've saved all my changes, and I want to apply this to my controller. So I go to Apply Settings. I say Apply. It says, hey, all of your dip switches are not turned off. It even reminds you to go over and turn all your dip switches off. So I'm doing that. I check that box. I click yes, and it's going to kick me out because now it is changing my IP address. Okay. So while that's rebooting, we'll come over here to ACM. And these are panels that are already configured on my system. So you can see I have some EP controllers. I have a couple LP controllers. We're going to go ahead and add this new LP1501, and we're going to add it as a brand new controller on our system. And we are going to add it using TLS. Unfortunately, I don't have the ability to add it with a certificate right now, but we can do it with TLS. So first thing we need to do is add a panel. And we're going to go ahead and just call this LP1501. Physical location, I always recommend putting in some sort of location. Where is this thing, where is this thing located? LSP enclosure, 1. Okay, our vendor is going to be Mercury Security. We are going to go ahead and install this. We do want it to work when we plug it in. And I'm going to pick LP1501 with downstream. So with an LP1501, you have the ability to use it as a single portal, or you have the ability to use it as a intelligent controller with a sub-panels attached to it. If you set it to just LP1501, both reader ports will be available to you for readers. If you set this to 1501 with downstream, you will have one reader port available to you, and you will have the other port that basically gets converted into an RS-485 for subpanels, which is what I want to do with my system. You'll notice, actually, since ACM version 5.12.2, we've now added this large encoded card format option. This is an option in ACM for federal government sites or customers that have 64-bit cards and above. So we have seen some 75-bit, 128-bit, 200-bit card formats, especially in the FedGov space. Keep in mind, if you enable large card format, the panel itself will only accept large card formats. It's not going to accept your standard 26 bits. It's not going to accept even the 56-bit Avigilon ones. This is for large card formats only. Okay, so I'm not going to enable that because I don't have any of those cards. And then I'm going to come down. I'm going to set my time zone. I have to be in California, so we're going to go US Pacific. Save it. Now, my previous webinar a couple weeks ago, we talked about doing wiring templates and all of that. For the purposes of this, because I'm not adding any doors to this, I'm going to cancel this because I don't need to add anything else, to that panel. Just wanted to show here's my panel created, and now that I have the panel on the system, I need to give ACM the IP address of where that panel is located. Now, if I did everything right with the panel, and I did everything right with my ACM system, this should come up. And if it doesn't, I did something wrong. For those of you guys who didn't notice that, I did just unplug it from power and plug it back in, just performing a hard reset on it. And we'll give that a second to try to boot up. And while it's booting up, we can even go in here, give that a second to come back up, and we'll try to log into it. Oh no. So much for my plans.
Hey folks, if you have any questions, feel free to enter those in the chat window in this meeting as Jared put it back to work there. Okay.
And there we go. So my panel is back online. And for those of you guys who caught this, I've actually installed this controller on another system before. So that's why I'm getting this panel ID does not match. This can be cleared by performing a reset download. What this is going to do is it's going to go out to the panel. It's essentially going to clear everything that's on the panel as far as messages and things like that. And then we're going to reconnect to the panel. It does reboot the panel. So use the reset download very sparingly. That's not something that you need to do often with a system. Only if you're having things like that where you have a panel ID mismatch, or potentially you've got a very large system where the panel is not receiving all of its messages from ACM, you can do a reset download. In most cases, you can also get away with just doing a parameter download. So this actually is a good point to go through here. The parameter download, what this is going to do is this is actually going to push everything that ACM has in its configuration down to the panel so that the panel gets its corrected information from ACM. So all of your card formats, your identities, and things like that, it'll push all that information without performing a reset. It's just going to push the information. A good thing to look at as soon as you've installed a panel is your clock time right? If my clock here is set differently than my computer clock, then it's very possible that I set the wrong time zone when I configured this panel to begin with. The last comms is going to tell you the last time that the panel communicated with ACM, and the maximum amount of cards that can be associated to this panel will be displayed here. Right now, I have not written any identities or token information to this panel, so the cards in use is 0. The firmware. This became very important at the end of February for most of the people that are on this call. There was what we affectionately refer to as the leap year bug with Mercury panels, where we had to do firmware updates on our LP series controllers. Not just ours, but basically all LPs that were running firmware prior to what was available. Mercury was great and fixed that really quickly, and we got some great messaging out to people. However, if you go into a panel and you see that your firmware is 124.1 or 122.1, which is 3-4 years old, or maybe it's even just a couple revisions back, you can update your firmware very quickly and easily. With ACM, we include all of our firmware packages in the appliance. So when you go to a panel, you click on firmware, and then we'll have all of the latest firmware for the panel that you're working on. So we happen to be working on an LP1501. If I needed to update that firmware, I could simply just click apply, and it would push the firmware, and in roughly 5 minutes or so, the firmware would be updated, and the panel would be ready to go. Okay. Now, one thing to note is with the firmware updates, you will take the panel down. Okay, so the panel does need to reset, and it'll completely reboot the panel at that point. So come back into our status here. A couple things we can still look at. We talked about reset downloads. The tokens parameter push. If I just want to push tokens to a panel, I can. So if I make a big giant change to ACM, I change all of the tokens, or maybe I had tokens set to not download. I can push all of those at once by just clicking the tokens, and then it's going to update the panel with the tokens. The last one here, APB reset. So anti-passback is tied to a panel. So when someone has, or if a panel has an issue in anti-passback where we're having a lot of users that are getting locked out because their anti-passback didn't get reset, you can reset the entire anti-passback rules for a panel by hitting the APB reset. And essentially what that does is if someone has APB, if they're locked out due to APB, then we will reset everyone that is on the panel, okay? And that will reset all of their anti-passback. So let's quickly go through our options here with our controllers. You saw me configure this when we initially configured the controller. This is where we can go in and we can we set our connection. Are we using TLS? Are we using a certificate? If you don't want to use TLS or a certificate, you can uncheck these boxes. If you want to perform the call home feature or the IP client feature, what you would do is you would turn this on, and then you would need the MAC address, which I've got some great addresses in here. You would need the MAC address of the controller, and you would put that MAC address in here. Now keep that in mind because you would also need to put in the IP address or the host name of ACM into the panel as well. Okay, so that is going to be how you set up IP client. There's a couple options here on your in your host configuration. These are delays and timeouts, and these are how ACM reports what's going on with the panel. So the panel or ACM is going to reach out to the panel essentially every 3 seconds and just send not a wake, but a keep alive. Hey, are you there? Hey, are you there? Hey, are you there? And then the panel is going to respond, yes, I'm here. Yes, I'm here. When we get to this offline timeout of 15 seconds, that's when ACM reports, hey, that panel is offline. I can no longer communicate with it, and it can create a panel offline message. You can also create or increase or decrease the polling delay. So the reply timeout is when we're receiving the message back from the panel. The poll delay is how long are we going to take to get that message basically read by ACM to do something with it. So we have seen a need to increase the poll delay, especially on systems where you've got the panel out at a network. On a network that may be in a sketchy network environment or over a public internet connection, changing the polling delay will help with that. So those are some of the things that you can change. When you have sub panels that need to be added to the system, you can add your subpanels here from the subpanel menu. So with the LP1501, like we mentioned before, you can add up to 8 subpanels that are 2-door subpanels, or up to 16 1-door subpanels for a total of 17 doors. So if I wanted to add an MR52 here, simply name it MR52-1, same thing, it's in IDF 1.1. Model is going to be a MR52. It's going to be using RS-485 port number 2. I'm going to go ahead and install this, and I'm going to say it's address 1. If that MR52 is using elevator inputs and outputs, I could select that. Once again, another topic for another webinar. Stay tuned for that one. So we save that, and now we have a sub panel included in our RS-485 chain. If I look at the status here, you'll see that my LP controller is green and working. So we give you messaging here in the status of the panel of what's working, what's not working. Communications, power, tamper, and reader. And the same thing with the sub panels. We give you all of the communications, power, and tamper as well. So right now, I don't have a way of wiring that up in a timely fashion, so I'm not going to wire that panel. However, when I do wire this panel and address it accordingly, this panel would come on green. So if we look at that on the subpanels page, this gives us the ability to go into our inputs and outputs and either name them, configure them, change the information for them, all through the subpanels tab. So you have inputs, outputs, and readers. One key feature with Mercury panels, and it's called something different in every physical access control that's out there, is the macros and triggers, or I/O linkages, or global I/O. Everybody calls it something different. With ACM, we have a concept of macros and triggers. I'm not going to get into this into great detail. However, macros and triggers are essentially panel level events. So we can create some sort of trigger and action based on something happening at the panel itself. So the panel goes offline. We want that panel to fire an output or send an email, or we want to set up 2-card control with manager's access, or we want to set up double swipe. All of that is done through a series of macros and triggers. And I'll be totally honest with you guys. We give you more flexibility with macros and triggers than I believe any other access control platform does. We give you probably more than you'll ever need, and it does take some pretty good knowledge to figure out how these things work with each other. However, they are extremely powerful in a solution for your customers. So I'm going to switch over to another panel here that's been previously installed, so I can go through and show you some of the other features here. So access levels. Essentially, this is the access groups that are created on the panel that have been applied to the panel. So I can go in and I can see what doors have been applied via access group to my panel. So this particular panel has 2 doors on it based on 1 access group. If I pick my advanced kit here, we should see a lot more than that. So here's all of my access levels and then the schedules that are associated with those access levels. So you can see the doors that are associated here. Here we've got doors and a schedule. So you get a quick at a glance everything that's going on there. You do have the ability to once again push this information to the panels or pull from the panels by regenerating the access levels, and that's going to give that information or send that information to the panels. Also, schedules. If you have a system that has lots of schedules, you want to be able to see how many schedules you have applied to a particular panel, because panels do have limits. Panels can only accommodate 255 schedules per panel. Mine here, I've only got 5 schedules created. These are based on the different access groups for the panels themselves. So I've got 5 schedules that are associated to this panel. We talked earlier about card formats. So card formats are first configured as an option in ACM, where we're going to say, hey, we're looking for these card formats. However, because we can configure individual card formats at a door, that gets reported back to the panel based on how many card formats are actually being used. So with this, I've got 5 card formats that are 5 doors that are using a 26-bit Wiegand format, but I've got 6 doors on that same panel that have 56-bit Avigilon. So I can see those doors here based on the card formats. The last thing here with the panels is panel level events. This is something that you can get very creative with setting up in your event monitoring. So you have the ability to use global events, things like panel offline or panel tamper or panel ID mismatch. All of these different events you can now create a local event for, and then have it perform some sort of alarm action based on that. I want a sound, I want it to send an email. The other thing that you can do with these events is you can create them based on individual hardware levels. So I can go into a specific input and I can say, hey, I want only the input events for that one single input. And I want to create a local event when an input goes into alarm. Air horn, send email, 2-person required to clear, whatever, whatever events you need to create for that. And that can all be done from within the hardware selector. Essentially, the last piece here, covering what you see in panels in ACM, you get the status on the main page here. So you get whether something is normal, whether something is offline, whether somebody didn't wire the power fault or the tamper or the battery. Those all show up here. That's another best practice. I forgot to throw it in my presentation, guys, but I will show you on the video here again. Once I bring my client back up, you have the ability to monitor the tamper and the power fail for your power supplies or the batteries connected to your panels. So like right now, this panel, I didn't do any of that. I have the power fault, I have the tamper fault, and I have a battery fault. I probably should go fix that. Same thing with my main panel here. I don't have a battery in that enclosure. So the enclosure is basically telling my panel, hey, there's a problem with the battery. So we do get battery status in ACM. If you ever need to know what any of these things are, we have a legend. Normal, uninstalled, communication, power, battery, tamper. So that's all there at your fingertips. One thing, I'm going to try to log into my system here so I can show you on a panel where the power fault and the tamper are and where you would normally wire that to. Apologize, guys. Patient 1 second here. So we bring this back over. So if we look at, let's go with our LP4502. Okay. So the LP4502, you've got your network jack here, this way. You've got your power connection. You've got a tamper connection below it, and then you have your power fail connection right below that. Okay, so all of that is right there on the panel. Now the tamper would be to some sort of tamper switch. All of the life safety power supplies that we offer have a tamper switch. So you literally just need to wire the tamper to these two points here, and then when someone opens the cabinet, you will get the tamper message in ACM, this guy here. Now, if you wire your battery or your power supply power fail circuit to this bottom one, when the system loses AC power and goes over to battery power, you will also get a notification as well, and that'll be done through the battery. If you guys don't have a power fail or a tamper, and you want that message to go away in ACM, you simply need to wire, I'm going to find one here, wire a jumper, sort of like this, between these two poles on the tamper, just like that. So if you wire a jumper between these two poles, essentially you are going to be shunting the tamper and the battery status. Now this is a good idea for your sub panels, because if you notice, your sub panels have a tamper circuit as well. Okay, so an MR52 has tamper and power fail. It's not always necessary to wire the tamper to every single sub panel in your system. You can just run a jumper between these two. So, guys, I'm gonna stop talking for a second. I'm gonna try to go through a couple of these questions. If you have a question and you want to come off of mute, you can always raise your hand or put a question in the chat window there. I'll be happy to answer them if I can read them. I'm having a hard time seeing them.
I don't see any questions in there, Jared.
We've actually got a lot of questions. Hang on.
All right, so.
Yes. All right, so I've got, because we haven't answered any of them. All right, so first one from Carlos. Can we also support FedGov issued certs? If the certificate is a .pem or .cert, I believe the answer is yes. I would have to dive into that a little bit further, Carlos. But we do support certificates from all kinds of different authorities. I personally have not tested what certificates we can add. I do know that 2 of our team members are actually working on some federal government stuff right now. So if you wouldn't mind me tabling that one and getting back to you, but I do believe the answer is yes. From Mr. Ed Hoffman. Welcome, Ed. When the MR52 supports 4 doors as OSDP, does that even include if we have OSDP devices that are so essentially, yes. You depending on the type of controller or subpanel. So the MR52 has 2 reader ports that can support 2 readers each in a daisy chained mode, right? So I can take the OSDP wire from my D0, D1 out to 2 readers and daisy chain 2 in one chain off of here, and I can daisy chain 2 off of the other reader port. But it's only 2 on the MR52. On the MR62E, this guy here, you'll notice that you only have 1 reader port, and this is OSDP only. So you would have to, if you wanted 4 readers to come off of this one panel or subpanel, you would need to daisy chain all 4 readers, and they would have to be addressable. So OSDP allows you to address or allows you to use addressable readers. So HID mobile readers allow for addressing of the OSDP chain. Verdi biometric readers do as well. So technically, yes, on both of these, you can have 4 doors. However, on the MR52, it has to be 2 doors in paired master, paired slave. It can't be 4 individual doors. This only supports 2 openings, as it were. Can the PoE controller supply lock power? Absolutely. So the LP series and the the LP 1501 and the MR62E, if you're using PoE Plus, both provide 1.5 amps at 12 volt lock power out of this guy right here, I believe, or maybe it's this guy right here. There's a voltage out. That 1.5 volts, however, is for the total load on the controller. So that does include your reader power, and it would take into account any lock power. So if you're using like an HID RPK40, which is going to draw 225 milliamps, and you've got 2 of them, you've now cut this down to about 750 milliamps or 650 milliamps of power that you have available to push out through that 12 volt output. Fire alarm release input for drowning maglock power. Typically when we talk about doing maglock or alarm release power, we do it in the power supply. So all life safety power supplies do have a fire alarm input that will either cut power or energize based on fire alarm. You can use an input on a Mercury controller. However, that is going to be determined by your local building code. These are technically not life safety devices. Therefore, they should not be the first device in the chain of a life safety event such as fire. That should go to the power supply, the life safety power supply, or whatever power supply you're using. Are there vendors? Oh, Ed, the answer to your second question about factory resetting, really it is just a best practice. It's a best practice for a lot of devices, not just these Mercury controllers. I actually recommend people factory reset their Avigilon cameras before they install them. You just never know sometimes what you're going to get. We do a great job of QAing all of the products that leave our shipping and receiving areas. However, sometimes we don't know what we're getting because all Mercury controllers are OEM from another manufacturer, and sometimes we just package them up and send them out. So it's just a good idea to factory reset them to clear off that information. Does the controller have to be in an AC enclosure for gates or placed in an outdoor enclosure? Not necessarily. I would definitely check the data sheet, Joel, for the operating temperatures. I don't have it right here on hand, but I do know that the operating temperatures are available on the data sheet for all of the controllers. I do know that I have LP1501s and MR62Es installed in the edge in some very warm and some very cold places. But obviously check the release notes or the data sheet just to make sure. We talked about that one. Test question for Rob Foster. Thank you, Rob. Is IP client option available on EP panels? Yes, it is available on EP panels. All of the IP or IP client or IP server options were available in the EP series. That may be a firmware issue that you're experiencing by having the panels drop off. It's also could be a communication issue where when you're doing IP client, the panel needs to be able to talk on the Mercury port that the appliance is going to be looking for. So by default, that's port 3001. That is configurable, but you do need to make sure that the appliance is able to actually have that Mercury Connect port open as well. If the certificate required option is checked, would the end user have to? Yes. So Frank, the answer to your question about SSL certificate, the answer is yes. When we talk about certificate authentication, that is a root CA or a certificate being pinned directly to that panel using TLS. So the customer or even you as the partner, as long as you can have that .pem certificate pinned to the controller, then that would work. Any advantage to using the 4502 over the 1502? Really, the big advantage right now is in the federal government space. Because of the 4502, you can order it with the built-in PAM module or is that personnel authentication module? Francisco, Bill, if I'm wrong, please chime in. It allows that module to be built in. The other thing to consider with the 4502 that is not currently available with us yet, but is slated in our roadmap, is the 4502 has built-in elevator or destination dispatch capabilities with certain elevator companies, ThyssenKrupp, Coney, Schindler, and we are looking to support that later on this year. However, right now, the 4502 is kind of a niche product for basically for federal government. However, there's no reason not to use it other than there is a pretty significant price difference between a 1502 and a 4502.
Yeah, so Jared, if you ask that, my opinion is that between that and the 1502, I would stick with the 1502. There's no real advantage for you to use that board right now. And the price is more expensive for the capabilities that are there that we're not currently using. So I wouldn't not suggest using that board.
Awesome, thank you. Andy, that's actually a good thing to talk about real quick. So I did talk about the power budget on the 12 volt out. Basically, when using PoE Plus, you do have to be very careful about what you're powering downstream. If you have a Rex, if you have a specific reader, you need to double check your reader voltage budget, your Rex voltage budget, your lock voltage budget. You need to check all of those things so that you're not overvolting the controller. I have seen cases here recently where we were trying to do everything with just an LP1501 powered via PoE, and it just wasn't enough power to do 2 readers, a Rex, a lock, all of the stuff that they had configured. And we ended up switching over to a 12 volt 3 amp source, which ended up having plenty of power for everything. So you do have to be careful with what you connect to edge devices. I do know that we typically have this slated for an hour. I would like to try to get through the rest of the questions here because there's a lot of them. If you do need to jump off, please don't hesitate to. We are going to be sending out this recording when I'm done. Reader option for biometric. Oh, yeah.
Hey, Jared, there is 3 questions from João Oliveira. I worked with him before. I'll take that offline because they're related to biometric readers, not the Mercury controllers in essence. So João, just get in contact with me. You know my contact information, and I'll assist you with that, okay? So yeah, you can skip those and just go ahead and jump to the other ones just to save some time.
Thanks, Francisco. Is the reader next to tamper onboard battery indicator? Ed, I'll get back to you on that one. We should talk about that one. Access level names actually being reflected at access level. So something to consider. Basically, the question is, can we have the access level or the access groups that we create in ACM reflected in the access levels at the panel? Currently, no. I don't have an answer as to why that is. But basically, when we create an access group in ACM, it attaches a numeric value to that, and that is what the Mercury panels see as the groups on that panel. And we number them according to basically when they were put into the system. Something to consider. We can certainly take that up with our design or development team. Brand new install. What is the order of creating roles? Craig, let me reach out to you offline and cover that one. We did a webinar last week on initial setup that covers a lot of that, and I think we've got some great information in there. I think I was the same thing, Ed. 1502 does not support Allegis wireless gateway connections. The answer is yes. So the 1502 is the one controller in our lineup that does not support wireless doors from Avigilon. It does support wireless doors from ASA Abloy. So if you are building a wireless lock configuration with 8400s or NDEs or LEs, you're going to want to use the LP1501 or the LP2500. If you're using a Perio, you can use any of them. No, you cannot see my dog, nor do you want to. She was in her crate, and yeah, really mad about that one. Can we run an H4 video intercom with combination biometric reader through ACM? Francisco, you're going to take that one. And what would you suggest for remote access? Remote access to the panels or remote access to ACM? What's the question there? I think that was a Mark Hilligus. Are you still on? All right, Mark, in the essence of time. Oh, for the appliance. Remote access to the appliance. Personal opinion, our appliances shouldn't be public on the internet. They should be behind a firewall. They should be protected by some sort of firewall equipment. If you have a need to access your appliance, you should be using either VPN or using a remote access client, TeamViewer, something like that to access your system. However, if you are confident in the security of your network, then you can do things like port forwarding of the web port or port forwarding of the Mercury client port and make that publicly accessible, but just making sure that the appliance is behind a firewall. We always recommend as much security as possible, but we do also understand the need for having internet connected devices. That's what ACM was designed to be. Core driver for migrating 5 to 6. Licensing is probably the biggest one right now. Many of you may or may not have seen April 15th was the basically the EOL for ACM 5 licenses. Another couple great things would be significant performance improvements from ACM 5 to ACM 6. We've added local backup. We've added support for the LP4502. What else? I mean, just tons of stuff. Bill, I think what I would love to do is figure out where you are and give you just kind of maybe a personalized update on differences between them, and why your customers and you as a partner should, or you as a customer should be upgrading. So I've got your contact info. I'll make sure someone reaches out to you from our sales team. With that, guys, since I've gone 6 minutes over, I really appreciate everybody being on here today. The webinar recordings will be uploaded to our folder, and we'll make sure that you guys have access to that. And if there's additional questions, please feel free to reach out to us. As I mentioned, Monday's webinar is going to be on NDE-LE, right, Francisco?
That's right. So folks, don't miss next week presentations. It's going to be, as Jared says, it's going to be dedicated to wireless locks. I'm going to kick off with the NDE wireless locks, and we're going to cover that, advantages and everything else that and how that reader works. So I hope to see you all next Monday at noon Eastern time. Okay, noon Eastern.
Awesome. And then Wednesday we've got Rob Foster, who's going to be covering our AD 400 series locks with the Legion, and then I have the distinct pleasure of teaching you guys about Aperio next week and all of the great offerings from them. So once again, thank you guys for your spending your lunch with us, and look forward to seeing you all next week. Thank you.